but nature is just, it is. It doesn't care what story happens in it, and that's really scary.
That was a great analysis.
Hello everyone!
Hello everybody!
Welcome back to another episode of Ha Ha Oh No. This week, Jack is reading a scary story of all things. Usually when Jack and I do these videos, there's a little bit of talk before. He'll give me maybe a little clue or a little bit of hype or something. I've heard absolutely nothing, so I'm exactly where you guys are.
Well, there is a reason for that, Daniel.
Okay.
Because I think this may be the scariest story I've ever written.
Okay.
And beforehand, I've always hyped it up too much to Danny, and I've always been like, dude, this one's gonna be the scariest one, like, you can't wait. This one is actually the scariest one I've ever written.
Okay.
And
that means a lot of hype though.
Well, I've been saving the hype for now.
Okay.
Okay? So, it's scary.
The scariest story that Jack has ever written. You guys are watching it right now. I'm excited. I hope you guys are too. Should we hit the title?
The title to this week's story, Daniel, is Into the Orchard.
I like it. Let's get into it. Let's get into the orchard.
Let's do it.
Erin was a survivalist. She was a rock climber. She was a long-distance trekker. On weekends, she could be trawling the bottom of a lake with a face mask and an oxygen tank, and the next she'd be skipping rocks out in the dunes or portaging across the French River just to unwind. Erin could head out into the wild with just a bivy bag, a knife, and a good set of waterproofs, and still find some kind of skewed comfort out between the tall oaks and pines before lunchtime. Ever since she was a little girl, she'd had a fascination with the great outdoors. Even as a kid, she didn't quite feel comfortable inside. Indoors, caught between the bright lights of the city, concrete, queuing, traffic jams, car horns blaring. No, that wasn't for her. That kind of life just wasn't meant to be for Erin. And that spark of passion, that denial of modernity, had been the fire that Erin had built her camp around. Still, that didn't mean Erin wasn't a people person. In fact, she was anything but a recluse and hated the thought of ever being too isolated or too alone. Since she was a young adult, she'd flitted from commune to commune, work shares in South America, DIY agriculture projects out in the Rust Belt, even a few cross-Pacific sailing schemes. You see, Erin always knew well enough that there was strength in numbers. It just took a little bit of isolation to realise that. For most of her early 20s, Erin pretty much travelled the world on a dime, working her way here and there, paying her way and sharing the burden of labour, happy to sweat for a hard day's grind, a hot meal and a place to sleep. It paid off because when she finally settled in Canada, her experience in pretty much every climate across the planet was the deciding factor that had won her the job as a park warden in British Columbia. She adored that job, and it had been the perfect backdrop to her late 20s. Luckily for her, she'd been placed in one of the more remote outposts of the Great White North, a small, semi-permanent encampment near Shelter Bay. Most of her work was keeping families not too far off the beaten path, keeping poachers out of bounds, and finding anyone without a fishing license. She didn't exactly enjoy that part, and although she hated the fact, bureaucracy was bureaucracy, and people never seemed to realise the true extent of overfishing. Despite the adventure of her profession, Erin never felt at ease while she was on the clock. She'd become accustomed to living by her own wits, and illegal fishing and lost families aside, it was only when Erin would take one of her several week-long excursions to the deepest, darkest parts of the planet that she truly felt at peace. And that's where she'd spend some quality time with her true family, an online forum that she'd been a member of since 2004, the Vagabond.com, a home for people exactly like Erin, masters of bushcraft and survivalism, people that she'd learnt more from than her own parents and grandparents combined. Every year they'd host the Grand Vagabond Walkabout, where all of the members would choose from a carefully selected list of remote, isolated trails where the real test of character would then begin, and slowly they'd whittle down the routes until only one remained. Once they decided on exactly where they were heading, every member that could make it would be given a set of coordinates and then be expected to hike in independently with just a knapsack and enough gear to get by. The rules weren't exactly strict, but peer pressure was peer pressure, and if someone was found with a Coleman gas stove instead of a tinderbox, they'd be ripped a new one for the rest of the weekend. For the most part, the trail that they'd pick would be one of the usual suspects. The Appalachians, the Rockies, the Cascades, the Brooks Range. Relentless tests of character and skill nonetheless, but relatively straightforward when it came to the seasoned members of the Vagabond Train. This year though, things were a little different, and the latest suggestion had caused quite the stir in Erin's online community. One of their lead moderators, whose screen name was Bright Eyes 84, but who Erin knew as Eddie, had gathered enough support to shake things up a bit for this year's annual excursion, and the buzzword at the end of everyone's fingers this year was a route known as the Orchard Trail. It raised more eyebrows than anyone first expected, but Eddie was resolute in his suggestion. He said that it had been a trail that his father and grandfather used to walk out in the parameters of Banff National Park, the location of which had been passed down from woodsman to woodsman, as it had been sequestered away from any conventional modern map, down to it being a disused trapper's trail following the gold rush of the mid-1800s. Desperate times, and as Eddie told it, the Orchard Trail wasn't exactly dangerous to walk, but it also wasn't exactly safe. Erin wasn't entirely sure about the suggestion, but it just so happened to be in her neck of the woods, and the thought of her not having to take the usual flight out of Fort Nelson bound for the States was appealing, to say the least. It turned out it didn't matter though, because without counting Erin's vote, the Orchard Trail was unveiled as this year's Grand Vagabond Walkabout by a landslide. And with that, before she knew it, Erin had hauled up her truck at the crack of dawn, packed her light gear and waterproofs in a knapsack, tied down her canoe, and she hit the road. The coordinates that Eddie gave were confusing, to say the least. The latitude and longitude seemed to point to a small, isolated river bend tucked within the interior of a sparse cluster of peaks just off the Sawback Range, but Erin thought nothing of it. After all, it was all part of the adventure. After driving for several hours, Erin parked up her truck just off of the 1A, and by mid-afternoon, she'd portaged as far as she could make it into the Sawbacks. The weather had held out well. The pale wash of the sky had slowly shifted into a brilliant glow, and as Erin flipped and tied down her canoe near a stack of old logging fells, she smiled at the vast expanse of the natural world. No cars, no horns, no screeching of tires, but just then, as she turned to make ground toward the most direct foot trail, that's when Erin heard a sound that was strangely out of place. Just for a moment, off in the distance, almost shifting and changing in the pockets of the wind, Erin could make out the sound of drums. Or she thought she could, because in that same moment the wind had picked up and they were gone. She decided to think nothing of it. She shook her head and broke ground. Erin wasn't exactly lagging behind, but if she was to make the first night's rendezvous by dusk, she had a fair bit of ground to cover, and listening out for the sound of some make-believe drums wouldn't exactly speed things up. After hammering down for just shy of 2 hours, Erin had made considerable ground, and as comes with the territory, had worked up an equally considerable sweat. Strangely though, the sun was still beating down relentlessly, despite being almost 6 p.m, and the late evening heat had done nothing for Erin's morale. Between a copse of old pines that had been littered with widowmakers, Erin took a seat by the branches, drinking heavily from her canteen, smoothing the pressure marks on her hips. For the last part of her hike though, Erin had been consumed by a strange feeling that she just couldn't quite shake. Over her years, she'd become accustomed to pinpointing the vast cacophony of the forest, the distant cry of a hawk, the constant chirping of chipmunks and grey squirrels, the droning buzz of the cicada. Her nose was her most important barometer, the damp smell of pine needles and the oaky moisture of the redwood. But on this trail, nothing seemed to add up. It wasn't exactly quiet, far from it. It was almost as if this part of the wild was too noisy, as if nature itself was making up for something, perhaps even covering up something. And the smell, the scent that had permeated its way across the trail was the most off-putting thing for Erin. Ever since she ditched her canoe by the riverside, the stench of apples had almost burrowed itself into her nostrils, clinging to every surface, her clothes, her hair, and her skin. She couldn't shake it. And as she sat on that pile of fallen redwood trees, something in the pit of Erin's stomach told her that this whole thing was wrong. It was off. Something about it wasn't quite right. And just then, in that fleeting moment of a thought, that's when Erin saw a flash of bright white flesh out in the distant stagger of the tree line. She jerked her head up, and in front of her, perhaps 50 or so yards ahead, she saw a figure standing in the dim glow of the undergrowth. She was certain it was staring at her. Whoever it was, or whatever it was, slowly tilted its head, leaning into its shoulder in some unnatural, grotesque display of the body. They would have been completely naked save for the thick coating of dirt and filth that clung to their body, bordered by a grizzled tangle of dark brown hair and a strange, oddly familiar dark object clutched to their chest. Erin froze, but only for a moment, because as she hammered the clasp shut on her canteen, she was dazzled by a brilliant flash of light from the tree line. And then another came. And another, but this time from a different angle, to the left of her, out in a denser part of the woods. Erin could barely see. It's as if she'd been hit by a flashbang or stared too long at the sun. She was dizzy, spinning, trying to find her footing in the undergrowth. Over and over again, brilliant flashes of light coming closer and closer from every direction out in the tree line. But then, just as Erin thought she'd collapse into the bed of pines beneath her, she found her footing and managed to focus her eyes for just long enough to scramble back down the path that she had came. She ran. She didn't stop running, and the endless bursts of bright lights followed her only momentarily. And that's when she heard the drums again, the incessant beat droning away the blanket sounds of the forest, but Erin paid it no heed. She didn't stop running. She couldn't stop running. This was her fight or flight, and she flew faster than she'd ever moved before. That pang in the pit of her stomach screaming at her, "Get out! Get out! Get out!" And she did. It was all a blur to Erin, but before night had fallen, she'd made it back to her canoe, and without a second thought, she hit back out onto that river, paddling so hard that the webs of her fingers were split red raw and bleeding. She was crying, at least she thought she was crying, half caught somewhere between choking on fear and laughing at the thrill of being alive. Whatever she saw, whatever that was, it wanted Erin dead. She knew it. She knew it in every fibre of her being, and she thanked her very bones for carrying her to safety. Erin drove home in complete silence, back to Shelter Bay. It took her just under 3 hours, and her foot barely left the pedal, shaking the whole way, but steadfast and keeping as much distance between her and whatever she'd just seen out in the damp, dark hollow of the Sawbacks. The Orchard Trail, whatever that was, hadn't exactly been the most thought out route. And that's when her mind quickly snapped and slapped out at her. The others, how could she forget? The whole of the Vagabond Train was still out there, somewhere in the wild, most of them alone, still trekking their way toward the rendezvous point to make camp for the evening, or at least she hoped they were, unless whatever she'd seen had got them. When she made it home, with a pang of strange guilt in the pit of her stomach, she fired up her computer in the vague hope that someone had left a post with a satellite number so she could call them and warn them. But when she clicked through the familiar homepage and into the new post section of general discussion, there was a notification waiting in the corner. It was a post titled, "Erin, we saw you," by Bright Eyes 84, 2 hours ago. Curiously, she clicked it. But before she knew it, Erin's eyes widened in an absolution of terror. The first post was a single picture of Erin from a distance, sat on that same pile of felled redwoods. The second was her again, this time looking straight up into the viewfinder, her brows furrowed in confusion. The next was a photograph of Erin from a different angle, scrambling across the forest bed, shielding her eyes. Then the next, Erin clambering down the trail, her face screaming and shrieking, the true definition of fear. Erin scrolled through them all, perhaps nearly 50 images of Erin running from that copse on the orchard trail. Her hands started to sweat, her stomach dropped from beneath her. She didn't know what to think. She couldn't know what to think. She almost coiled into her chair at the perverse, strange nature of what she was staring at. But then, as she clicked back through the general discussion pages, at the rows upon rows of new posts, Erin nearly choked on her tongue. Every post beneath her own was titled in the exact same manner, just with a different name. The names Erin recognised of her fellow survivalists. Harry, we saw you. Yolanda, we saw you. Rudy, we saw you. Nick, we saw you. Bobby, we saw you. But when Erin finally choked back her tears and mustered the courage to click onto those pages, she had to stop, because the first few photographs she found were far, far bloodier than her own.
Go on. Wow. Wow. Where do we start then?
Where do we start?
Start big and then we'll go small.
Start big and go small.
That was really, really at the core of what I think our channel has been about. A lot of blending of traditional fear with modern fear. Especially towards the end then, like that whole time I was like, this is like classic in the woods, you know, primordial whatever, you know, primal fear. But that wasn't actually the scariest part. The scariest part was real modern technology. And even down to the way you described identification hiding in the corner. I don't know why, like stuff like that. It was like that became the new version of the forest. So that was like terrifying for her to like trek through that.
Yeah.
That's like the overarching theme.
That's a good. I never thought of that. That's cool.
Yeah. Brilliantly written.
Thank you, sir.
The build up. There was a point where I was thinking, are you building this up too much?
Yes.
I was like,
I always feel that.
it was, you know, it was just the right amount, and the payoff was really big, and it was like, and then you kept me guessing as well, because I thought, okay, now you put your foot on the gas, now it's just going to be a hack and slash in the woods.
Yeah.
So I thought that was masterfully done as well, like the way you let it back to that. Yeah, brilliant.
Thanks, man.
It was brilliant.
Thanks, man.
Have you got anything you want to say about it?
No, I'm just actually really happy with that story, like from start to finish. As soon as I finished it, perhaps more than quite a few of them actually, I was just like, that feels like a complete story.
Yes.
Do you know what I mean?
It was, to use your turn of phrase, quite cinematic.
Yes.
I could picture that.
Well, I was inspired a lot by, one of the greatest British horror movies ever made is The Descent by Neil Marshall. And even though that's a film set in America, it's a British horror film. And that whole ideal of kind of just people who are so at the top of their game when it comes to the wild, because the wild is, for me anyway, such a place of just base horror. It's already scary. Mm-hmm. It's meant to be scary. For thousands of years we've been scared of the forest. It's always meant to be scary. The wild serves that purpose, right? Mm-hmm. So for me to have someone who's like so good at what they are, to be put into a situation and then somehow find fear somewhere, I think that's really scary, because like, you know, we've been out up north and stuff with people who were capable at like doing stuff, and I'm just like, if that person wasn't there,
well, yeah, I know what you mean. To be fair, like the places we went, it was always going to be fine. Like,
no, that's a bad example, but yeah.
But I totally understand. It's sort of like just a real reminder that we haven't beaten nature.
That's what I mean.
We're just not there,
and that's the beauty of it, right?
Yeah.
But then like to find things in there that there was two, maybe all of them. There were two direct links to the wider story through that.
Okay.
And they were very hidden, and I think I didn't want this to be a story about part of like the wider universe. I wanted to serve as its own of how it did, but also for fans of trying to decipher the wider scale of things. this will. If you knew the cues, you know them. So,
Okay.
Yeah.
I must admit I missed them.
So Bright Eyes 84.
Right.
Eddie
Right.
was the trapper guy from The Hunted.
Right.
The same guy who lured the narrator in that story to his
Okay,
island.
so they're the same group then, or something. Though.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not a million miles away, because that one was not set on the west coast.
That was Washington State.
Washington State,
Yeah.
yeah.
So in the same rough area, I did kind of get my geographical maps out and.
No, that was great.
Yeah. But yeah, that was Eddie. That was Eddie, the same guy.
Yeah.
I will admit that. And then The Orchard is a direct allusion to Diana's Orchard, which is
In the soil.
played a part in the soil, in the family soup, in Camp Hollow. Yeah. So
Yeah.
the goddess ancestry as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So there's
Those were good. Yeah, they weren't too overt.
no, and I didn't want them to be either.
Yeah.
I wanted them to be someone who'd be like, aha,
Yeah.
aha.
Yeah. I want to talk about Bright Eyes and that whole ending. I love being surprised by an ending, and I did not see that coming.
I'm so glad you said
maybe a
that.
second or two before it happened.
I'm so glad you
As
said
you were
that.
saying it, I was like, oh.
Well, I thought I'm so glad you said that, because I had a point in my head where I thought Danny was going to get it. And I probably put that a little bit further ahead. Than,
Well, here's the thing. Like, as soon as it said like we saw you, then I was like, oh, they took the pictures. That was a flash of the photography. I didn't expect there'd be others.
Okay, good. Okay, yeah.
You know, because you're so, as the listener, you're so focused on Erin, and like you're so focused on her, and also the fact that this guy said we as well made me think that they're all in on it, and she's just the latest recruit, but it's not.
She's been a member of the Vagabond Train. People she loves.
Yeah.
Like, these are her family, right?
Yeah.
And one of them was a bad apple.
Yeah, but yeah, very good. But it also comes back to that whole thing in almost like Camp Hollow when you know it was like we want warriors, we want only the best of the best and stuff. So maybe that was the whole thing. All these years building up to it, going across the Appalachian Trail and like you know all the standard stuff, and then they get them out. They gain their trust, especially if we're dealing with creatures or entities where the years don't mean anything. You know, that's the same as a 10-minute training session for them. You know, a decade or whatever, or
Maybe Erin passed their test.
Exactly. That's what I'm getting from that. And this was reaping the harvest, so to speak, in the orchard. You know?
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. That's a
Also, like that and the gloaming was just like the best. Pure like writing, sentence to sentence writing.
Thanks, man.
I think you know there were so many unique phrases. It's difficult, I find, with the stories where it's set a lot in the same place.
Yeah.
To describe like the scene moves on, but you're still sort of in the same environment, and it's really difficult to keep describing what's going on around you.
Exactly right. It's difficult to keep momentum in where it is.
Well, in the first line, if you say, you know, the underneath the shady pines, whatever, then you can't say shady pines again, even though you haven't left the shady pines. The next time you describe what the pines are doing, they have to be something else.
Some other way. Yeah.
So and that whole time you were describing all this stuff in nature, and it was just seamless.
Thanks, man.
I also I know it's not the same at all, but I also related to that a bit with my time in BC when I was going to that mountain.
You were a direct inspiration for it.
My one trip. But,
hey, dude,
yeah.
you were out there, man.
I went on a trip up to like northern BC, and there was a day when me and one of the other volunteers, it was just us and a dog going up a mountain. It was just the sheer vastness of it that was scary. Like you described, like there is nothing. Like you cannot even see like a light or anything. There was just for about, I don't know, I almost felt like I could see across, like it was like the distance, like half the size of Wales or something. There wasn't a single thing. It wasn't a single
For our Welsh
thing.
viewers, I bet it was.
Yeah. And just the stillness in the air, so still.
Yeah.
There's just nothing, and also it doesn't care about you. That's the creepiest thing about that nature, and the vibe I was getting from that is that like it's just nature's completely indifferent to us, and it doesn't. You know what I mean? Like,
Despite being a master of it, Erin had to rely on herself to get her out there.
Yeah.
Nothing
yeah.
saved her.
Yeah, exactly.
Nature wasn't the enemy.
It's just that, and that's sort of scary because like
It's the indifference of nature.
that's what I've always found creepy about the vastness of nature,
That's it.
or like stuff like the ocean or whatever. It's just so indifferent, and like no matter how scary our human world gets, it's still purpose fit for us. You know, still purpose built. When someone's running in a horror movie and they go through a door with a handle on, you know, like everything is still trying to. There's still tools around us, you know, to help us, but nature is just, it is. It doesn't care what story happens in it, and that's really scary.
That was a great analysis. Yeah.
So anyway.
So right. No, but it's true. It's terrifying, isn't it?
Yeah. But also sick. Okay, I will give you a score now.
Oh my god.
And as you always say, like I had a score in mind, and I think the ending bumped it up for me. And I was definitely waiting to see if there was if you lulled after the chase, because I was like, I was just going to sort of trail off now, and she was all right, but it was like whatever. So I was like holding out, but it definitely reached for me an 8.3.
Yeah.
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 It was the gloaming, but with a little bit more pure creation and pure imagination.
Yeah.
Like
100%.
I just didn't see that coming at all. With the gloaming, I was just blown away by like how well written it was, and it was really creepy throughout. There wasn't any of that real build up. It was creepy from the offset. But with this, there was that little spark. That thing at the end was just that little bit of imagination that like pushed it up as well. Yeah.
Thanks, man. Out of all of my endings, that was my favourite.
Yeah.
I feel like that was the most complete ending, I think.
Oh really? Yeah, it really was.
Yeah.
Yeah. And as you always like to do, a little bit open.
Yes.
A little bit open. Very complete.
Yeah.
There's a little crack in there if you want to go any further with that, because she did survive.
Yeah,
you know?
Exactly.
So there you go.
It's down to Erin.
Well,
Whew.
there we go.
That was a good one.
Yeah, I enjoyed
Good
that.
one, mate.
What do you guys think of that? Let Jack know. I really liked it. Hopefully you guys all did too. If you have your own scary stories, you can send them into this email here. The theme we're doing for this month
It's radio.
is radio. So maybe we have
We've
some text
actually-
up there.
We've had some incredible submissions so far.
Yeah.
Oh god, like we've had some incredible. I don't want to give you guys too much
Yeah.
fighting talk, but we've had some really good submissions so far.
Well, let's just, for those of you who don't know what we're talking about here, so every month we do a live stream, we read out your scary stories, and we've chosen the topic for the next live stream to be radio. Well, actually, the viewers chose it, and the only stipulation we have is it has to be between 1,000 and 1,500 words.
Yep.
So as Jack said, we've already got a bunch through, but please do send your own in.
We'd love to hear your stories, so please send them to us. We should be live streaming the first Friday of the month, which is going to be every month, and we're so excited to hear what you've got to show us. So
Yes, and we also have an exciting new series coming out soon, which we're not going to talk about here too much because it is the end of the video now, but keep your eyes peeled. We'll do a community post and it will be all over Twitter and Instagram, but yeah, things are changing.
oh yeah, the time is that Bob Dylan? That's Bob Dylan, isn't it? No, that's Bob Dylan. Things are changing.
Things are changing.
That's Dylan, isn't it? Things are changing.
Things are changing. Right, time to go now, guys.
Anyway, guys, see you later. We're going to blow the fire out, so lovely to see you as always.
What noise are you going to do for this?
Click.
I like that. Well, it's gone. I didn't even get a chance to talk about it. There we go, guys. Thank you.
Cheers, guys. Thank you.